Hey guys, Rob here, Baltimore Store 640. Gonna go over how to install a metal roof today, and then on a classic rib roof. Also, just want to make sure we have the nail and fasteners proper dimension, where to put the fasteners, how far apart, and then of course the space in between the end and then the fields. A couple key components on a metal roof is just making sure you have all the parts you need. So we're just going to go through the material list and make sure we have everything we need today. First thing you're going to need is drip edge or eave metal. This is drip edge. Drip edge is a little bit smaller than eave metal. Drip edge measures from top to bottom 2 inches and then up onto the roof at 2 inches. Eave metal would be a little bit different. It would be 2 inches down and then 3 inches across. Just gives you more coverage onto the roof, and then of course Premier Pros, you're going to need that either way. The next thing you're going to have is your cap, ridge cap metal, then your rake metal, and your foam fillers. Foam fillers are super important. You have one profile which is for the bottom of the roof. It already has self-adhesive on the back of it, or you can use seal strip. I'm not going to use seal strip today just because I don't want to waste any unused material. All this material is left over from jobs, so we're going to utilize the material we have here today. And then at the top of the roof you should have a foam filler between the metal itself and the cap, just to seal everything in nice and tight. There is 2 different types of screws you should be using. One is a longer screw. This is actually going to be used to fasten the metal down. And then there's a second one which is a smaller, it's almost 3/4 of an inch, just to fasten the 2 panels together. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually check the metal panels, make sure they're the proper size. We do not want to piece the metal panels together. So our metal panels are 66 inches long, and our roof that I built today just for this demo is 63.5. So I'll just cut 2.5 inches off of the panels to make it work. Not a big deal. Alright, as most of you guys know, we run a 2-man crew. So generally when we're doing a shingle roof, I have my labor pre-cut all the shingles. So when we're doing a metal roof, I have him lay out where the screw patterns are going to go, just to give us a nice clean line for the screws. So your fasteners are very simple. At the bottom of your roof, we call it the end, or your start point, you're going to have drip edge or eave metal and your foam filler. So at the bottom, you should be screwing into that foam. That foam is 2 inches up, which is roughly here. Now the pattern for your screw pattern is on each side of your ribs at that foam filler. So each side of your ribs at the foam filler. And then from there, it's every 18 inches. Your screw pattern is every 18 inches from there up. Now we do not have to do like we do the ends, where it's on each side of the rib. We're actually going to go to one side of the rib. So if you, from your edge of your roof over, we're going to start to the left-hand side of the ribs, and we're going to do the left-hand side of each rib all the way up. Now at 18 inches, we do this a little bit different. We mark a 2x4 and we use that to mark it. But just to give you guys an example, we're going to mark up 18 inches. We're going to put a line for where the screw is going to go. 18 inches, put a line for where the screw is going to go. And another 18 inches. We're going to follow this pattern all the way up so that we have our end screw and then our field screws every 18 inches. And then we'll do the same thing all the way up the roof, all the way across. Now my labor will generally take all the panels one at a time, lay them out, mark them. That way when I get up on the roof, I'm not using a tape measure, trying to hold my balance or do anything like that. I have all my marks in place, exactly where I'm going to put every screw. Now the screws do have a rubber seal on them, so these are exposed screws. And the purpose of these screws are that they actually have a foam filler on them, and that creates a gasket. So once you tighten this down, that foam is going to seal itself to the panel, and you don't have to worry about caulking it or it leaking or anything like that. So now that we've marked the panels, we know exactly where the screws are going to go. We can get started on installing the metal. I'm going to put you guys off to the back here, and then that way you can watch me work. So there's a good view there. First thing we're going to do is we're going to take our drip edge or eave metal. We're going to make sure we have the proper distance, which we do. We're going to turn the corner and run the corner up the roof. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the corner just about an inch to 2 inches. Turn that so that when we put this on, we have a nice tight turn up the side of the roof that will not interfere with the install. Once we've done that, okay, now that we've got our metal and it's turned up the sides of the roof, it's no different than drip edging a normal roof where we cut the bottoms and the tops and then turn the metal up. And the reason we're going to do that is just for watershed purposes. So that's what the manufacturer wants. From this point, we're going to go ahead and check our layout of our panels. We want to make sure that the panels fall so that when we put the end metal on, when we put this rake metal on the sides, it doesn't land in the middle of a rib. Because if this lands in the middle of a rib, you have no way to fasten it securely, and then it's going to sit crooked. So we're going to measure out from the edge of the roof down to the other edge of the roof, and just make sure our panels fall to where we aren't on the high side of a rib. What I've noticed with most of these sheds is a 12-foot shed does not measure 12 foot, but our panels measure out 12 foot. So on a 12-foot shed, that's from 2x4 to 2x4. At that point, you have a almost 3/4 of an inch, more like 5/8 trim on the edge, and then your sheathing. So you end up with a shed that's 12 foot 2. So if you start tight to one side of the roof, by the time you get to the other end, your rib is going to fall right where your rake metal needs to go. So knowing where to lay out the roof is almost as important as installing the metal. What I've found to be super easy is using your foam as your layout guide, because your foam is going to show your ribs. It's going to show your high points. So we're going to go ahead and install our foam at the bottom, right on the drip edge. That way we can make sure that we're installing the panel exactly where we really need it. Go ahead and fill these loops. They have some self-adhesive on the bottom of it. And I like for my rib to start right at the edge of the sheathing. That's going to put us right there. We're just going to go ahead and press that down. If your order guy orders you seal tape, you would then just put the seal tape on top of the foam, and then that way when you put the panel down, it adheres the two together. Like I said, I'm not using any seal tape today, just because I don't have any kind of material, and we don't have any extra laying around here. So I'm going to go ahead and keep adding. You don't want to stretch this stuff out, because if you stretch it too far, what's going to happen is it's going to expand to the wrong side. Put it in nice and loose, and then just get it sealed tight. Now that we have that installed, we're going to go ahead and grab our first panel, and we're just going to get a dry fit. Make sure so we're going to put our first panel up here. Like I said, I'm going to peel this back. I like for my panel to actually start at the plywood. And you can see there, I've actually started directly at the plywood. And the reason why I start my panel at the plywood and not all the way to the edge, like I said, on certain roofs, depending on the dimension of the panels, you will end up, by the time you get to the far end, where your rib or your high point is falling wrong with your rake metal. So your first piece is really super important to make sure it starts in the correct spot. You can always throw your rake metal on, and we're going to throw our rake metal on, and then we're going to check to make sure that it actually sits proper. And as you can see, we are exactly, yeah, we're about 1/8 of an inch inside of that rib line, which is perfect. So that's a good fit. We're going to go ahead and grab some screws, and we're going to start putting the first panel down. So let's just go ahead and grab some screws. We have a 1/4 inch bit, hex head bit at the top. So we want this panel to be flush at the bottom. We do not want this panel to overhang. So the manufacturer is saying that a flush fit is the best fit. So we're going to go with a nice tight flush fit here. And then we're just going to go ahead and grab our screw. Now this very first one, we do not want to put a screw in that very first one, because that's where our rake metal is going to sit, and we want our rake metal to sit flat. So we're just going to go ahead and go to our next mark. Try not to overdrive your screws. There's no reason to countersink these. It's just going to put dimples in the metal. If you take your screw gun and you turn your fitting down, most of these screw guns running these metal in 5, maybe 6, and then go on a lower drive speed, just so you're not damaging the metal. We do not want to damage the metal. Alright, so we've already checked to make sure this thing is 100% square. But again, we're going to follow nice and flush at the bottom, nice and smooth. And we're driving these screws into the foam filler. We're not driving these screws up high, 8, 10, 12 inches. We're driving them in right at the foam filler. I'm actually going to turn her up a little bit because that was super slow. And on our ends, like I said, we're on each side. We're on each side of the ribs on all of our ends. And then once we get into the field area, we're just going to go on one side of the high rib. There's no reason to do both sides in the field, just at the bottoms and the tops. And I should have hired a cameraman, because holding the camera and screwing is not as easy as I thought it was. Alright, so this is our layout for our field, or our end. Our end, like I said, each side of the high ribs. And then we're going to do a couple field just so I can show you guys whereabouts on the field. Give me 1 second to readjust. Okay, like I said earlier, I had my labor go through and he's actually marked all my field locations. Just so I didn't have to spend any time with a tape measure. And we're going to run all of our field screws all the way up. Alright, so that's just a couple field screws. I'm going to cut out and go ahead and put all the field screws in real quick and then come back, and then we're going to put the second panel in. Give me 1 second. Okay, so we have our end screws on each side of the rib, and then all of our field screws on the left-hand side of each rib. As you can see, more screws at the rake, the eave, and the top, and then less screws in the field. We don't need as many. But they do need to have a straight line. I know a lot of people don't understand why we mark, but we want to mark a line all the way across. So these screws are in a steady, consistent line. So when you're standing back from afar and you look up, you got a couple straight lines of screws. So we're going to go ahead and grab the second panel. This panel has 2 sides to it, just like all panels. So it has a joiner side and a bottom side. Grab the panel. We're gonna bring it over, and we're gonna lock her in. So, super important that this panel sits proper. Just making sure that everything sits flat. We don't want any big voids. But that'll give you guys an idea. I did not actually mark this panel, but that's okay. We're just gonna throw a screw in it just to hold it in place for now. All right, so we've got the panel in. We're gonna do two things. Number one, before we screw this whole thing off, we're gonna make sure it's flush, and then we're gonna check up our rake. And as you can see up our rake, we fall in a great spot. We're not over, we're not too short from the end. That way our rake metal will actually sit right over top of this edge here, and we'll have a flat surface for the edge of the rake metal to attach to the roof. So we did a great job lining that up. I'm gonna go ahead and mark this off, screw it down. Everything looks good there. And then I'm gonna show you how to join the two panels together, and then we'll start working on the rake metal. Okay guys, we have all of our screws in. We have all of our end screws, each side of the rib like we discussed, and then we have all of our field screws. All of our field screws are to the left-hand side of each rib. You do not need to do both sides of the rib. You can just pick one side. Generally, I go with the left and then up the sides. And the spacing from your end to your field starts at 18 inches, and then every 18 inches all the way to the top of your roof line. So that's a proper screw in. We have our foam in the bottom. We're at a point now where we're gonna go ahead and start putting our rake metal on the sides. And there's a couple little details for our rake metal that we need to follow. We're at our rake metal, so we're gonna go ahead and do a couple little details for that rake metal, just so we can get a good alignment on it. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our tape measure and our pencil. We're gonna go ahead and measure down 1 inch. And then we're gonna cut this metal. So we're gonna measure down 1 inch. We're gonna cut it. We don't need this little nip. We're gonna bend this down. And then we can go ahead and just cut it straight. What that's gonna do is that's gonna give us a nice clean surface to tie back into the roof. So when we install this, we're going to be over the edge, but we're going to close that end off. We're also going to cut this side piece off, or we can actually bend it in. We don't actually need to cut it off. So we're going to grab the snips. Bear with me 1 second. And we're just going to cut the lip off of that. Just cut the lip. That way we can make a nice turn. And it gives us a nice clean turn finish. Or we can just cut that completely off. Not a big deal. Alright, now that we have it on there, we're going to go ahead and put a couple screws in it. So our key locations for the screws should be the same locations of where we've already marked and started our screws. That way everything's in line. I'm big on making sure everything's consistent and lines up and looks good. So we'll put our first one right on top of the rib. Right next to it. We'll go ahead and do that all the way up. Alright, so I only put that one in temporarily so I can cut the peak. I'm going to go ahead and cut the peak. I'm going to put you off to the side here while I cut the peak. I'm just going to grab a speed square, pencil. Just make sure I got a nice straight line. So, we just want to cut this on a 45-degree angle or 22.5 depending on the location of the roof. So, before I do a nice clean cut. time. So once we've got all our field screws in, we're going to go ahead and add side screws. So we have our field screws, our starting screw, and I'm going to bring you over here so you can see what I'm doing. Where our line is, we're actually going to put side screws. And the reason why we're going to put side screws is so the wind doesn't take this away. No matter how tight you put the top screws, the side's going to be vulnerable. So we're going to go ahead and just put a couple in there. That gives us a nice tight fit. And we'll do that all the way down 18 inches, just like we did our field screws. As much as it is important for the roof to look good, it's also important to make sure that it stays on the roof. Because if the metal blows off, it does nobody any good. Alright, so now that we have our rake metal on, the next step from here would be to put the other side and then our cap. We're going to skip the other side today just because we don't need to see both. We've already got one on. We see how we screw it, how it attaches. So I'm going to sit you back to the side and we're going to get the rake metal up there and we're going to mark it before we install it so that we can put our foam fillers in. So hang tight 1 second. Alright. So we're going to take our ridge cap. Just going to lay it up here. Once we have it where it belongs, in the center, we're going to go ahead and just walk down it. And it's going to work where it belongs. So now that we have the marks of where it goes, we can put our adhesive strips on here, and then we can go ahead and put our foam tops. So I'm just going to lay our foam topper in here, just because, like I said, I'm not using any adhesive today. So there's our marks. This is going to prevent any water from kicking back up onto the roof, any leakage at the top, but also it's going to prevent any type of insects from being inside of the ridge. We don't want any bees' nest up inside there or any type of animals or creatures climbing up in there. Once we have installed the foam, we're then going to put our ridge cap on. We're just going to go flush to the end here. A lot of guys like to use caulk. Put a bead of caulk along the side here so we can actually embed it into the caulk. I've seen other guys use self-adhesive. Either one works, as long as it has something to prevent it from getting any water up the sides. So once we've done that, we are going to screw the panel. We are going to screw the panel into the foam filler, right into the roof. We're not going to cheat it. We're not going to do every other one. We're going to do every single one all the way down. But the big thing is making sure that we install it with the foam. It's not going to change the dimension on how high or how far or anything like that. I'm going to grab a couple of screws this time. You don't need to countersink these. I drove that one a little far. And you really should be using 3/4 inch screws on your cap and also on your seams, which we're going to do in a second. So we have a screw at the very end that's going to help keep it safe. We have a foam filler and then a screw on every rib all the way across. And then of course we would cut the edge and put one on top of the rake metal on that side as well. Just wanted to get you a general idea of how that was done. And the only other thing is using a 3/4 inch screw on your actual seam. The reason why we use a 3/4 inch screw and not 1.25 inches is we don't want to press this down or drive it in too far. Today we're going to use a 3.25 inches just because that's what I have. So you should be getting on every single seam at every 18 inches all the way up. So I'm going to jump off, screw them, and come right back. Alright, so we have, just a recap, we put our drip edge on, we put our foam filler in, we then screwed our end on each side of our rib, as well as our 3/4 inch screw in our joint between the two panels, just so we don't have any void or this panel doesn't flap up. We've done that all the way across. Our field screws, we've done every 18 inches from our foam filler up, every 18 inches on center. Now, where the location of them is to the left side of the high rib. We don't need to put anything in the middle or on the right side. Our field only needs to be every 18 on one side or the other. Don't do both sides. And then, of course, all the way up on our seam, we want to make sure we put our smaller screw there. Our rake metal, we cut the bottom end. That way we can just close the hole. Ran our rake metal up, put our screws in our field, and then also did our down screws on the sides to make sure that the rakes was nice and tight. Our ridge cap, we put it up there, we mark it, we put our foam filler in. You guys can see the foam filler fits exactly, that way no water, no animals, no insects, nothing can get up there. If your roof calls for a ridge vent, you're going to use a different detail, but today this is our base model with no ridge vent. And then a screw on every rib. You should be using the smaller screws, not the 1.25 inches. You really don't need to go into the plywood of the roof. You really just need to get the two of these to adhere to each other using the smaller screw. Then we would cut the other end. I'm going to cut real quick. I'm going to come back. We're going to pop that ridge cap back off. And I'm going to show you what to do if you fall at the end of this roof. If you were to fall in the middle of one of these instead of having an actual lip. This upturn, the minute we put our rake metal, prevents any water from going inside the shed. If this is not here, we have to do a small detail change that's going to allow us to kick this up 1 inch or put a seal tape down it and then put the cap on. So I'm going to cut, come right back to that, and we're going to get going. Okay, so we just grabbed an extra panel. I'm going to go ahead and take a straight blade and I'm going to score this panel and cut it instead of using a pair of shears or a pair of snips. I'm going to cut it right at the groove here, whether it be in the middle of the field or up against one of the other grooves. I'm going to cut it 1 inch bigger than the roof, and then we're going to take our 1-inch tongs and we're actually going to turn that metal upward to give us a nice seal at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and get started cutting this and then break it off for you and show you how to install it that way as well. If you find yourself in the field and you don't have a pair of shears to cut this nice and straight, or you don't have a pair of snips or it's too tight to the edge, take your straight blade, score where you want to cut. You might have to score it 3, 4, 5 times, and then give it a nice little bend and twist, and it will snap off. But it gives you a nice clean cut. And it doesn't crink the metal up. And the last thing you want to do is use a pair of snips. Tin snips require you to have a little bit of leverage up and down, which generally gives you a little curl in this area and will make it look not so nice. Now that we have it, we're just going to pretend for a second. I'm just going to pretend this is the end. We do not have the rib on the side. So what we want to do is we want to actually turn the metal at the edge. We want to lift this lip. So we can use a pair of our tongs and actually start working this and bend it upward. We just need to get 1 inch all the way down. So we're going to go ahead and just start working 1 inch. Put you up here so you can see what I'm doing. So we're just going to start working at 1 inch mark all the way up. If you screw the panel down and do it on the roof, it's a lot easier. I'm limited on space of what I'm doing right this second. So I'm just going to start working that. But ideally screwing it down keeps it nice and solid so it doesn't bend on it. All we've done here is created an edge which will allow, when we install this, it will allow our rake metal to sit over top of it, and that gives us a nice clean safe area that the water won't be able to travel on the roof, won't be able to go underneath here and get back into the shed. Super important to make sure that we're sealing this thing watertight and not potentially leaving it exposed to get any water in there. If your roof works out to where you have a rib on the end, no problem. It gives you a nice good fit, then great. If your roof works out, I don't know, maybe you have 6-inch upgraded boxes on the side, and your rib falls short, so you end up in the center of one of these. Maybe you're 3 inches from the edge and your rake metal won't go over this, it sits on the inside. By turning that edge up 1 inch, it'll definitely help protect you from getting any water that sheds inside. And we basically just created our own rib. That's all we've done there, is create our own rib valley, so that the metal sits in flush, and then we use the same screw-in panel. We don't change anything else. At that point, everything is screwed off the same way. Well, I hope this helped you guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. And I guess like the big bosses would say, shed on.